Well, good afternoon. Hey, it's Lyndall again from Marshfield Old School Times. We're coming to you from the old school building here downtown Marshfield. From George Ballard's counselor's office, is who occupied this room when I was in school. Larry, I'm not sure who had it when you were in school, but we've got a little memorabilia on the wall, and we try to remind ourselves of some of the history of MHS. And today we're really glad to have actually a cousin to me, Larry Rost. Larry, welcome.
Thank you for the invitation. I am amazed as I walk into the facility. How many other people are here? That's great.
Well,
That's
there's a lot.
absolutely great.
Yeah, there's a lot going on today. They've got a Christmas vendor event over here in the gym, and of course the donut shop's open. The arcade's got some parties today, and so there is a lot of activity, and it's great to see, and we appreciate that. We're going to have a really interesting show today, and I have a feeling we won't get it all in today, but if not, we'll ask Larry to come back. He's done a lot of research on land grants in the United States, and in particular, we want to talk about Missouri and certainly Webster County. I think you're going to find that very interesting. Before we do that, though, I want to make sure people kind of know who Larry is and a little bit about him, and we're going to go down a little bit of that path, and then if we have time, he also has done a lot of research on the history of banking in Webster County. Of course, my dad was a banker, so that I will look forward to that as well. Logan Fraker's here as our technician and producer today. Logan, thanks again. And we always want to thank Dennis Beck for our intro music. And if you haven't went to YouTube and pulled up some of Dennis's music, it's really good. He's a very talented musician, graduated from Marshfield in 1975, and has a great library of songs. And a lot of them pay a lot of tributes, you might say, to Marshfield and growing up here in Webster County. So thank you, Dennis, for that again. So Larry, let's get started. Again, we're going to kind of start out just kind of at the beginning. I'm sure you don't remember when you were born. I don't remember when I was born, but I'm sure there's some years not too long after that you can go back and remember. But tell us a little bit about growing up out on Farmland Road.
Yes, we are only about 3.5 miles from town, 3 miles from town, I guess. And speaking of my birthday, my mother was a very ardent diary keeper. So she left all of those after she died, and my brother Jerry and I kept those. We put them in a safe deposit box, and so after her death, I thought, I think I'll just go look up the entry of the day that I was born and see how happy Mom was about that. So I opened up the diaries to January the 7th of 1945. And I expected, maybe even an additional page that would have been added on. How delighted it was. So, so Mom was able to jerk you back to earth pretty good, and the entry was at 2 o'clock. Larry came. Period. So that took care of the birthday.
That took some steam out of your sail,
Yeah,
didn't it?
now it did.
That's interesting, though. That's great. I knew your mother was pretty well read. My mom used to talk about Aunt Velma and how
Yeah.
she was always an interesting person to visit with.
She was. She never complained about anything. It didn't make any difference what it was. There was no complaints coming from that quarter.
Yeah.
They, being she and my dad, bought a little 40-acre tract of land, and this is known as 1618 Farmland Road today. They did that in 1938. So then they bought another 60 acres, but they sold it and got the 40 that was next to them. And in my estate plan, I have put in there that I want to retain title to that land until the 100th year, the Centennial Farm. So
that's really neat.
we
cool.
have a goal for that, and that would be reached in 38.
Yeah, and you could make that too.
2038.
You might make that too.
we're going to own the land that long.
There you go. Well, the genetics are pretty good.
Yes, they
along your
are.
line,
We
along those
we
lines.
have long
Uh-huh.
lifelines.
Yeah.
My parents never did move nor live anywhere else
Yeah.
except on
Yeah.
that tract of land, and I have always said it's a rock pile. It just holds the world together, but it was certainly home.
Makes a lot of hay though.
Makes hay.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
absolutely.
right. But mom and dad were like everybody else. We economically we were not anywhere close to being well off, but the traits that they taught was much better than that.
Absolutely.
We had to be honest. We had to be truthful. And did they ever teach us to work hard? And
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
was a good early beginning.
Well, we were blessed with that in the Rost family, and I'm sure on your other side of your family as well, and mine as well too. And we don't know how thankful we should be
Right.
here, growing up here in Webster County. So your dad, Fred Rost, was the younger brother of my granddad, Cale,
Right.
Cale Rost, and again, we, Melanie and I and the boys live just down the road from where Larry lives now, and it's really cool that you were able to come back home and get back on the family farm, and thanks to your folks keeping the farm, obviously, all those years, and I think that's really neat. You have a brother. You
Yes.
had a brother,
Jerry.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yes. Jerry died in 2005, I guess it was. It seems impossible that it has been that long.
Right.
But he did a lot of carpentry work.
As your dad did as well.
Yes, yes.
Uh-huh.
He built many houses, and he never worried about whether there was going to be work available or not, because he always had a list in front of him, and I helped him for 2 or 3 summers, and it became obvious to me that one of the things that he did, the work day was 8 o'clock until 5 o'clock, but we were on site at 7:45, and we did not start rolling up the extension cords until after 5.
Yeah, they got a full day's work, didn't they?
They got a full day's work. On my mother's side, I have a claim to the interest that I have in Webster County. She was a McElwain, the first assessor of Webster County that was not elected but was appointed by the court. Was J.W. McElwain, which was my great
grandfather, which would have been 1855, right?
1855.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome.
I think he served there. I think he only did that for 2 years, and of course at that time, Lyndall, they'd get on their horse and they would go, and then they would stay with somebody overnight that they could stay with, and then the next day get on their horse and go again.
That was to check the homes, the assessment.
Yes,
the
right.
Yeah.
And I think he did that maybe 2 years. But that was it, and after that he did not. The job was big enough that they divided the county into 4 quadrants, and they had 4 assistant assessors, I guess, but they were the real assessors for their quadrant of the real estate in that part of the county. So yeah, we go back really farther on my mother's side than what we do on
That's
my
true.
father's side.
Well, were they? Was he raised or from down around Seymour or that area?
No. He immigrated also from Ohio through Illinois, through Missouri, probably through St. Louis, and settled in Niangua.
Niangua, okay.
The Niangua.
Because I know the county commission initially, the first court was held at Hazelwood.
It was,
and that's where they held court until they built the first courthouse in Marshfield.
But he acquired quite a bit of ground down in roughly where the interchange is at down there now, and later acquired quite a bit of ground over in the Pleasant Hill church area, which his son then pretty well took charge of that later. So
Right.
it was
Yeah.
the old history is there.
It is. It's fun, isn't it?
Yes.
So you had a brother growing up. What'd you guys do growing up out on Farmland Road in the
Um,
50s?
we were just a general farming community.
Mm-hmm.
Raised a big garden, of course, but like so many, we had dairy cattle. We milked without milking machines. We
Mm-hmm.
had two of those in each person's hands,
Yeah.
you know, and,
Right.
and we could milk the cows and couldn't run too many head.
Mm-hmm.
So that required the additional employment as building homes and what
Mm-hmm.
have you. Um, we learned how to work, and both of us went through the first 8 grades out in Oak Hill,
Oh, yeah.
sometimes called Bugtown. So we graduated from the rural schools,
Mm-hmm.
and then, of course, transported into Marshfield High School
Mm-hmm.
here.
And of course, Oak Hill, for those that may not know, is out on Farmland Road. After you make the loop past my place and Larry's, you turn right. Then it's on the south side out there
Mhm.
where Lois Turner lives now,
That's
and
right.
it was converted to a home by her father, Walter Brixey, several years ago. Beautiful home there, made out of the old schoolhouse, and so that was the school for that part of Webster County.
Yeah. Jerry went on. Jerry worked at, and this would be within your family.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Fred Fraker
Mm-hmm.
owned the Ford tractor
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
dealership here in Marshfield, and
Right.
Jerry worked for Fred
I didn't know
for
that.
quite a while as a parts person and kind of an office sort of guy.
I
Yeah.
didn't know that. That's
And
interesting.
then he decided to go to the Navy, so he spent his 4 years there and came back,
Uh-huh.
and then went for a couple of years to Southwest Missouri State, then it'd
Yeah.
be MSU now,
Mhm.
and then started into the construction
Mhm.
business and what have you.
And of course, you passed away at a fairly young age.
Yes,
Kind of
right.
suddenly, heart
Yeah.
attack or whatever. So,
Yeah.
sad. Had a farm out on what is it?
Stringtown
Stringtown
Road.
Road. Yeah,
Yeah.
Stringtown.
Yeah.
I heard you and Don Replogle talking one day. I think over at Grillo's or something. I think you guys ran around out there together in the farmland area and maybe squirrel hunted and did things like that together.
We did. Don and I went through school. We were in the same grade, and and I always told him that between the two of us, I certainly was the boss because I was 7 days older than he was.
Yeah.
When we came to high school, we found that some of the people in the grade behind us was older than we were, and a person that you know very well is also deceased. Danny Clemens was
Yeah.
one of them.
Yeah.
He was older than we were.
Is that right?
But yeah, we'd rabbit hunt ever so often
Yeah.
and enjoy the company. But
Interesting. And you graduated in which year?
1962
62.
was my
Okay.
graduate year.
Yeah.
72 in our
Mhm.
graduating class, I believe it was.
Mm-hmm.
And then I proceeded on up to the University of Missouri. You talk about a scared kid.
So you went straight to Columbia then? from high
17-year-old
Wow.
up there mixing it up
Uh-huh.
with the St. Louis and the Kansas City elite and the
Mhm.
smart people that
Mhm.
were up there. But through a lot of hard work, we was able to get through and qualified to teach vocational agriculture.
Mhm.
And I did that at West Plains, Missouri, and in Willow Springs before I went into the banking business.
Gotcha. Was Mr. Young pretty influential?
Very,
I bet.
very
Yeah.
much so, yes.
Ireland Young was the VOAG teacher here in Marshfield, of course, and a lot of boys. And I don't know if there was any girls then. Now there are, but back then it was mainly boys. I think we'd credit him with a lot of their success that
Yes.
went on. There was a lot of teachers that came from Marshfield,
Yes.
FFA teachers.
Yeah. And that there, it was very interesting whenever I went on the campus up at the University of Missouri. Of course, you're looking for some friends and people that you might know. It was amazing, just amazing how many of the students up there, especially in ag school, had come through the programs of vocational agriculture and FFA. Stockton, Rogersville, West Plains, Houston, Missouri sent lots of students up there. Good people, every one of them.
And many of those students came back and student taught in a lot of these Southwest Missouri towns. I know here at Marshfield, Mr. Young had a lot of those University of Missouri students. I ended up serving in the House of Representatives with Lyle Rowland, who was a state rep from Taneyville, and he went on and he became the superintendent of Taneyville later on. But he was a student teacher here with Mr. Young just about a year or two before I came through. And anyway, it's a lot of heritage with FFA in Marshfield for sure. So when did you meet Katie?
It was after graduation from high school, I guess. We dated during our college years. Even before our college years, then we were married in 65. I'm challenged to always remember that date.
I didn't want to put you on the spot.
As you are also.
Yeah, I understand.
And we have a lot of fun together. We do everything together. We have been team members.
Yeah.
And whenever we came back to Marshfield, we said, well, okay. I was raised south of the tracks, and with large family backgrounds, I'm related to everybody south of the railroad tracks. She had the same background north of the railroad tracks, the Greers and what have you. So when we came back, we had been gone nearly 50 years.
Is that right?
And people would come up to us and to both of us and say, I think I know who you are. Well, who are your grandparents?
Yes.
Because we don't know you, and probably not your parents either. But your grandparents are important to us. And but we always had this to say, Lyndall. We moved several times. We spent a couple of years on the Purdue campus, and then we lived at West Plains, Willow Springs, and we lived at two different places in Illinois. We learned a valuable lesson in the moving around, because people sometimes will complain about the community that they find. That's their fault.
Yeah.
The community will accept you if you are friendly and want to be accepted.
I believe that too. I've heard that even here, well, you got to be a native. No, I don't think so.
No,
I think if you talk to the Aaronses or Bill Walker and Joe, or there's just a ton of people, Bill Sims, of course, Sims married a girl, but Mike Cunningham, there's all kinds of people that would tell you, no, you have to have a want to and a will to fit in and kind of fit into a community. Make sure you're kind of conforming to what that community is, and don't try to change the community.
Right.
Yeah, I think
that isn't going to happen. And don't complain about it either.
Right. Yeah, I think
just
you're exactly
go for
right.
it. Just go to work.
Well, you had a great run there. It sounds to me like growing up, and a lot of now. Of course, Katie's folks, Kenneth ran the service station here in town, right?
Yes.
And so a lot of people knew Kenneth.
Yes.
Here, right where Hoover Case's office is,
right.
South of the square, and her brother Don, and Edna Mae, well-known people around Marshfield.
Yes.
Speaking of Mr. Young, I just thought as we were talking, we're both related to him too. His mother was a Rost, I believe, a cousin. Our Young's there's some connection there. I know.
They're yes. There's they're cousins.
Yeah.
And the surprise, there was another person on staff here that was also a cousin, Ray Culver.
Ray Culver, okay.
Was a cousin.
Yeah, that's before my time. Don't remember him.
He taught science, chemistry, physics, biology, and what have you here.
Okay.
Over here about where the donut shop is.
Yeah, that was the science room, that's for sure. That's for sure. Well, let's move on. We've great recollection of your childhood and growing up, but let's kind of move. Well, let's before we do that, talk about your children. Let's talk about your children because they had to come in there soon after that.
We had two
Uh-huh.
children that lived. We had one that was stillborn,
Hmm.
but our oldest daughter is Melanie,
Mm-hmm.
and she is now living in Bentonville, Arkansas,
Mm-hmm.
and has a son of her own. And then we have a couple of great grandchildren now. Our son Randy has done extremely well,
Mm-hmm.
and he lives in O'Fallon, Illinois, and he
Okay.
married an Illinois girl from
Okay.
Albion, and
Uh-huh.
so they,
Yeah.
so we're kind of in the middle now,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
300 miles
Right.
from anybody,
Right.
but it's okay.
And you spent time over in Illinois, so
We did.
yeah, we'll get into that. So you, after your teaching career in Missouri, and then you started in the bank.
Yes.
Let's start down that path.
Um, we worked. I always said I love teaching. I really liked it, and the only thing that would get me away from teaching would be in the banking business. But the particular bank I was thinking about was the First National Bank of West Plains.
Mm-hmm.
It was a community-owned bank, and I had that opportunity. They presented it to me to go to work for them. I accepted that, and that worked. But at that same time, you had the consolidation of the banking industry that was moving into stronger hands, and the lead banks in the different communities became targets for the St. Louis banks and the Kansas City banks.
The Boatmans and the U.S. banks and so forth to buy
to
them.
acquire.
Yeah.
So they had acquired that bank before I went to work there. The person who was the president of the bank, a condition of the sale was that he would run the bank for 5 years thereafter. Now, he absolutely ran the bank.
Yeah.
5 years after, but then he decided to retire the day that it went past the 5 years. But he was a community person. Everybody respected him. He was an absolute good banker, and so as the years passed, the ability to control, which became a restriction for a community bank, began to take over because they owned the bank.
Sure.
Period. So that we found was difficult to live under the same roof of those roofs, and so we sought employment over at community banks over in Illinois. There was an opportunity there because there were hard times there.
This was just the 80s.
Yes. The oil prices had been, and there's a lot of oil pumped in the Illinois basin, and the prices dropped from about $40 a barrel to about $12 a barrel. That was bad. And the commodity prices for agriculture, because it was wheat, soybeans, and corn, also dropped after people had paid a little too much to own an acre of land. So there was a lot of distress. And at the same time, bankruptcy filings were becoming socially acceptable.
Yep.
And that changed. So to survive, there's sometimes when there's stress, there's also opportunity. So I had the opportunity side. I hadn't set up the stress side, but I got to solve a lot of that. And I know how hard that is.
Yeah.
Because I've been through it. But communications was the key. And we'd sit down with people and they would be distraught. We would explain, look, here's the bank's position, here's your position. And The people received advisements that I'm very critical of the legal profession for this, because the first thing that they are told is do not talk to your banker. That's a serious mistake.
Yeah.
If you can talk, you can solve problems.
That's right.
If you can't talk, you're headed to the courts. And the bankruptcy court, and I can say this, and I will not apologize for it, is the crookedest court in the world. They are not fair. They are just interested in collecting their money up front because they get paid first. And that's too bad. But we got through all of that.
And the savings and loan scandal was all coming in about that time.
Same
thing. I mean, you had a lot of
yeah.
disarray in the whole banking industry nationally then.
Very stressful.
Which town was that?
Fairfield, Illinois.
Fairfield. And how far was it from St. Louis?
We could be at the stadium, Cardinal Stadium, in an hour's period.
Yeah, so it wasn't too far.
It's on Interstate 64,
okay,
which runs over to Evansville and Louisville.
Yeah,
But it was in the mid. We had some good farming areas.
Oh, I bet you did.
Yeah, really good. And
the Ohio Basin.
It was a great place to. It was a great place to live.
Yeah,
we enjoyed it. Yeah.
How long were you there?
Let's see. I spent 2 years at Albion, which was a neighborhood town, and we really made some progress in solving some of the bank's worst problems. And the other bank at Fairfield, I guess noted, or they needed some help too, and so they came over. And you do kind of follow money.
Well, yeah.
You're obligated.
That's the way the world works.
Family-wise. So we moved to Fairfield. I was offered the bank presidency in 1991.
91, okay.
And I retired in 2010. So we spent really 20 years.
Yeah, about 20 years. Now, you had an opportunity to buy into a bank then.
We could. It was owned by community people, shareholders, and what have you. And as stock became available, it was available to be purchased, and I did do some of that. Haven't been sorry about that. The bank's very strong still today.
Still got some interest in it.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, and it's been a good. It's been a good investment.
Well, so. So then when you retired in, would you say in
2010?
2010.
Yeah.
Is that when you came back home?
They wanted me to stay on, but I had promised them that whenever the door hit my rear, I was gone.
Yeah.
But they wanted me to stay on the board until my term was up. They were 3-year terms, and I had a year and a half or something like that left. So I did stay there that long.
Yeah.
And we quite honestly, we never intended. Katie and I never intended to come back to Marshfield. We did not.
Yeah.
That was not a part of our plan.
Sure.
During all this stuff, I went out and took flying lessons and learned to fly, and had my own little old plane that we puttered around in. And we had dual runways on the airport there, so we was going to stay right there. But we lost our renter. My folks were deceased, and our renters had moved out a place out here. And so we said, well, we can put our real estate up for sale in Missouri, or we can sell the farm. And then Katie found out then we weren't going to sell the farm.
Yeah, yeah,
So we put our house up for sale. Gee, it wasn't very long until a cash offer came along. We had to move in 10 days or 15
Oh my goodness.
days. So that's how it worked. We headed back to Missouri.
Good for you. Good. And I'm sure that's been enjoyable.
Oh, it was a great time. Katie's mother was then in the rest home, and it worked out great.
Sure, sure.
Don needed the help,
Sure.
and so it was
Yeah.
good for us.
Yeah, that's great. Well, let's talk a little bit about your land grant research. You've done a lot of work on this, and give me some handouts here, as a matter of fact. But so, of course, our mutual, I guess he's my 3 grade, maybe you're 5, or no, my 6th grade, you're 5 grade, whatever. Jacob Frederick Rost.
Yes.
I guess probably is where maybe you got you started looking at all this, or maybe you.
It did.
Yeah.
And then my cousin Don Rost, he's well known in
Yep.
the community, and he is the family historian.
Mm.
And anytime that I needed information, I could turn to
Yep,
Don,
yep.
and he had it.
Yeah.
So, but I did become interested in it, and the land grant thing always confused me. I couldn't get it all sorted out. And then another area that I really had to find out was on the railroad. Whenever the railroad came by, there was government land and there was railroad land, and I never could get that straight. So I went to the Historical Society, spent a lot of time there, and got 1 or 2 odd projects that I could work on, and so I picked up and made it a practice on the railroads to learn from abstracts.
Mm-hmm.
Linda Blazer had a gift of abstracts from one of the abstract companies, because the abstracts became outdated when they went to title insurance.
Right.
So we have about 1,000 abstracts at the research center. And Linda, well, we're not getting those used very much. Could you put together some kind of a program, maybe? And I agreed to do that. And I started and I stopped and I started and I stopped and I started and I stopped. And this doesn't work. This doesn't work. So finally, I had to come to the conclusion: you must audit 1,000 abstracts if you're going to put together an index system.
Yeah.
You know what? When I got into those abstracts, you can just they can just mesmerize you.
Oh, I bet.
The chains of title, people filing, if they have court actions against them, their foreclosure actions. You find out which newspapers it was published in. It had to be
right,
and
had to be in that county, didn't it?
Yes.
The paper.
Yes, a newspaper of general circulation. And it just came. Well, you can almost get addicted to something.
I bet you could.
But I enjoyed it.
And you actually did look at all 1,000 of them?
I looked at 1,000 abstracts.
Wow.
But whenever you figure out how many parcels of real estate they are, there's probably, I kind of checked to say, okay, how many meters do you have, Webster Electric? Oh, 18,000.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So. The abstract inventory is certainly not complete, but some of them are real fat. Well, immediately those were complete abstracts that carry all of the information about the railroads. So I got a lot of information put together about the railroads, and I diagrammed that, and that's a story all of its own.
So now, like your farm, that abstract's probably not very thick.
That abstract doesn't exist.
Is that right?
It was a private transaction between an individual and my folks.
Yeah.
And there was not an abstract.
But how many owners prior to your folks?
I don't know.
Not very many, I bet.
No, I could go get an abstract, but you have to shell out the money if you want to get an abstract.
Yeah.
So today, and they was doing abstracting work back in 1938. We were still doing abstracts when I worked for the bank in West Plains, Missouri. And so the procedure was, okay, you get the abstract, you bring it up to date at the abstract company, you have an attorney to do a preliminary title opinion, You read the title, you clean up all the exceptions to the chain of title, then you record your documents and they make them a part of the abstract,
Right.
and you go back for final title opinion. That's an expensive
A lot of
process.
work.
Expensive. And the title insurance company has kind of interrupted a lot of that.
Yeah.
There's still occasions where having the abstract is good. But the abstract is hard to read.
Yeah.
Very difficult to read. And it's almost like trying to learn another language.
Mhm.
So people that find an old abstract laying around in a desk probably throw it away.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a history of a piece of land.
Sure it is. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen several. We used to, like you said, you used to always get one when you bought property or whatever, but probably the last 30 years maybe, we don't see them much.
Yeah, the
Since the
title
80s
insurance came in the late 80s, probably.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting. You gave me a chart here of the various types of land grants, and that's something that I wasn't aware of. Why don't you explain maybe that, and then focus on the ones that maybe pertain to Webster County the most?
Yeah, right. It is quite interesting, and there are several of the land grants. One of the early land grants was involved with education. Elementary education. The folks in Missouri and a lot of the other states was interested in, well, first of all, you had a huge immigration population out there. When I started at the University of Missouri, we still had some students up there that were going to school who their folks still spoke German at home. And so the elementary education 1 through 8 got the attention of the legislature, and so they passed legislation, and the major tenement on the legislation is this. I won't go into legal descriptions of land, but I would say this to you. I don't know how to describe it, with the exception that if you had 4 helicopters and you hooked them up to the corners of the Christmas ham that you have that came to you in a sack.
Yeah. Right.
Hook it up, stretch it out, and set it down over the county, and now you have a grid. And the east-west rope would be, let's say, numbered 30. And if you went 1 north, it would be like 31. 31 north, 28 north, or whatever. The distance from one to the other is 6 miles.
Okay.
You have cords running the other way that are rangeland. Those were township lines. You have cords running the other way that are range lines, and they are 6 miles apart. So if you laid this cord down over Webster County and a lot of the other counties, you would find that it's probably about 5 townships wide and 6 townships deep.
About 30 townships.
About 30 townships. Now, Texas County would be
bigger.
Much bigger than that.
Now, how many sections of land in a township generally?
Very good question. 36.
36 sections.
Yes, and they are labeled in the most screwy way that you've ever seen. They start in the upper right-hand corner as section 1, go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, drop straight down 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
Zigzag.
Yes. And so listen, our forefathers and mothers were smart people. And if you want to implement an educational program, they came up with this as a formula. Every section numbered 16 will be dedicated to elementary education.
Which would be in the center of the township.
Basically in the center, yes.
Because of the way you mentioned 1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
and then back like 16 would be,
right.
Okay, all right.
So if you have one of those in every township, then section 16 is roughly 6 miles apart from each
Right.
other.
So let me put just a little bit in perspective because I'm a little slower than some. So Missouri's chartered in 1821.
Right.
Webster County in 1855.
Right.
We had a lot of immigrants and folks coming in that time frame. I mean, there was a
Yes.
big movement.
Yes.
Like our forefathers
Go west,
came from,
young man.
come from Kentucky or
Right.
Illinois or Ohio before they had came from over
Right.
from Germany or whatever. So that a lot of migration, and then the legislature in
20 something.
1820 something. So maybe prior or right after Missouri became a state.
Yes.
They're the ones that formed this grid.
Yeah. Well,
Or
no,
Not quite.
the land surveyors got that done, and then they just dovetailed in.
I see. Was that all done about that time too, or prior?
The survey would have been before that.
Okay, that would have been something the late 1700s, like
Probably.
whenever the federal Congress,
Right.
like George Washington was a surveyor and so forth.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to put it in perspective.
Yeah, and that's a good question.
Yeah.
It's sometimes, and conceptualizing it is tough too.
Yeah. So the legislature realized that you had, like in the size of the county, the size of Webster, you had 30 townships. They needed a school, basically one in every township,
Right.
approximately.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
That's
So
basically
they picked the section within the center of the township, sort of.
Uh-huh.
Okay. All right.
Now the fooler, for those of us that are lay people, is okay. Let's see. Is that a city lot? No, a section of land is 640 acres.
Yeah. Yeah. There's 37 or 38,000 acres in a township,
So
and we got 30 in Webster County.
yeah. So
Man.
the mystifying part about the substance of the legislation was, wait a minute, I went to a rural school. We didn't have but 2 or 3 acres.
Yeah.
What happened to
Yeah.
the other acres?
Good question.
Well, it was to be used for educational purposes. So they could sell off the land, they could sell off the timber, they could do this, they could do that, or they could cut the timber and build the buildings, whatever. But they had access to that 640 acres. And it goes without question, there had to be some coordination.
Yeah.
So that's where the county superintendent of schools came into the picture.
Mm-hmm. Which was an elected position.
That
years
was
ago.
an elected
Yeah.
position.
Yeah.
It was a pay position.
Mm-hmm.
And that person, whomever they were, the most famous one during our was Ellis Jackson.
Ellis Jackson.
And so they had to settle, okay, the creek runs through here, the district should end here to the creek. And then on the other side, another school district, so that the kids could basically have a school within 3-mile walking distance.
3 either way.
Yeah. And we came up, I think, and now if the facts bother me, I just make up something.
Well,
But
yeah, that's the easiest way.
but we
I always
have
want to glorify the story a little bit.
we have
Enhance it.
we have in the basement of the society, the museum, a section regarding the rural schools.
Right.
And I think there was 88 of them. So we had 30 or 35 of those section 16s that the superintendent of schools would maybe sell off the assets of the 640 acres and then build the school buildings and the furnace and the library and all of that kind of stuff. and run maybe the office. I'm not sure
Right.
that if there was a levy that was run with a school tax. Probably later there was,
Sure.
but that's how the little one-room school. I'll tell you, Lyndall, it was one of the greatest things that was ever invented.
It built America.
Was the rural
Yeah.
schools.
It built America.
You put a civic center
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of 3 miles this way, 3 miles.
Yep.
And it became the community.
It established the culture that we know today.
It did.
The communities. Now, some say we're moving away from that, and certainly we it's not like it was in the 50s and 60s. But you go back when we were kids, that's the culture that was established because of the one-room schools in a community.
Yes.
And that became the town center. So one question. The 30 townships that Webster County had, they had to have one per township, or in that section 16 in every township. How'd we end up with 88?
They were just extra that was needed
because of the size, population,
our geological structure,
okay,
or
gotcha.
obstructions. And we probably would have been a little more scarce if we had only had 30. So we had more of them that was put in to access that edge. Plus that community center, I tell you, they'd have basket lunches. And then one school would stand another one with softball. Didn't make any difference who won. There was Christmas program. Willis Case had to wear himself out having pie supper auctions
exactly.
at those one-room schools.
Sure.
But we ended it all in 1964.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The last 8 rural schools were consolidated.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so there we evaporated the community center.
You did. We talked a little bit about that in some of our previous podcasts. One in particular was when Pat Barr, Mr. Barr's son, was on our podcast, the very first podcast. And the expansion of the Marshfield School District really grew about that time. All 12 grades were in this building until 1960. Mm-hmm. And they built the Hubble Elementary building, which was our elementary building, the only one, until about 4 years later, they decided they needed to build another building. So they started the next project over there, which became the junior high, pulled this one down to just the 4 grades then. So we went from 1959, by 1965, we went to this one building here, all 12 grades. By 65, we had 3 buildings.
Yes.
And it was because of that consolidation, and all those rural kids were coming into town.
Yeah. And there's another corollary to this, and this happened all across Missouri. You needed to have educated teachers to teach. Mm-hmm. So SMS's original name was Southwest Missouri State Teachers College. Mm-hmm. North, Northeast, Northwest, Central, everywhere in Missouri, those state colleges were put together really because of the need for teachers in those rural schools.
Yep, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right.
So it just rolled that way.
Yeah.
And the states responded then with their programs on putting together the teachers' colleges, and doing federal grant monies, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But there was a need. The little one-room schools created the needs for the for the teachers' colleges. Mm-hmm. There's one over in Cape Girardeau and Warrensburg and Parkio and Bethany maybe and Springfield.
That's right.
So we got that.
Yeah.
We got that.
So that's the elementary education grant. Mm-hmm. Then the next one you had down here was the Homestead Act, which we've heard of that. A lot of people.
Right.
Okay, well, we kind of know what that is, but we probably don't really know what it is. So why don't you tell us a little more about the Homestead Act?
The Homestead Act made available and I think it was passed in around the early 1860s, Civil War time.
Mm-hmm.
Civil War was bad, but there were so many good things that came about as a result that caused us to propel forward as a society.
Mm-hmm.
And Homestead Act provided for access to 40 acres or up to 160 acres. You can make application for it through the Land Patent Office. You could obtain ownership. I have a personal example, and I have shared that with Lyndall. Uh, our great grandfather, my great grandfather, Jacob Frederick, um, applied for and received a patent page and an abstract that granted him 160 acres. I can tell you exactly where it's at.
Mm-hmm.
It was between here and Seymour, and he got the 160 acres. Now, there were some conditions. I think you had to put a residence on it. You also had a chance to redeem the land 5 years later or something like that at a very nominal fee. But we look at that number today, we don't realize how big that was back in that time. So he got title to 160 acres.
That was 1872, is that right?
1872,
Yeah.
I believe it was. And he was a German immigrant. He landed in the United States in 1857, found his way to Missouri, and then in the files at the Historical Society, we were given circuit court files and what have you there. I found a certificate in his folder where he disclaimed any affiliation with his original country.
Yeah.
And he signed it.
That's really
but
neat.
With an X.
Yeah. And you gave me a copy of it here. I'm going to show that just so people. I'd never seen one of these. So it's called Declaration of Intention, and I'm sure our federal government probably, and this was dated December of '74. I'm sure in order to receive his land grant, he probably had to declare that he no longer was a German citizen, which it was called Prussia then,
Prussia.
of course.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really neat that you were able to find that, Larry. And so that's just an interesting piece there that we have now because of your hard work.
Yeah, it's just a part of the history.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I did not look up anybody else's.
Yeah.
But the files are available for you during the hours that the museum is open, which is Monday. Well, Christmas or cold winter. I think they
reduced
shut
it
down some of their hours, but it's available up there.
Sure. So they get the 160 acres and start their family and so forth, and then of course your grandfather, my great grandfather Sam Rost, was his son.
Yes.
And Sam was the father of all of the Rosts here in Marshfield that people would know. And,
right.
And Grandpa Sam, I think, died in '72, if I'm not mistaken.
That's about right.
I think fall of '72, if I remember right. So many people still might remember him, but it really kind of brings it home as far as, even though 1872 or 1850 something was a long time ago, I mean, his son, we knew, and so it really kind of makes us all realize how close we all are. So into history and to how things were that many years ago. And that's why we're doing what we're doing. We're trying to capture all this history, and we're trying to pass these stories down because my grandchildren or great grandchildren, who may still, hopefully I'll still know, will be able to have this information that would be lost if you and I and everyone else wasn't doing what we're doing. So
it's intriguing.
It is. So the land grant thing, I'm sorry, that was the Homestead Act. Now we're going to move to the land grants to colleges. Go ahead and talk about
Yeah,
those.
okay. The Civil War. I don't know when we're going to run out of time.
Well, it's 3 minutes till 2, but I can stay a little
You'll
longer if
sign
you can.
You'll
Yeah.
give us the alarm.
Yeah, we'll
The
stay in here if you want to for a bit.
We had obviously the Civil War was a contest between states' rights and also slavery. But when the South seceded from the Union, it really was bad. But there was several things that began to happen, and one of those was the Confederate people were not interested in advancing machinery or the Industrial Revolution. We do not want to mechanize things because we have our beast of burden.
Mm-hmm.
And when they seceded, the other people said, we need to have colleges, universities that are going to deal with the agricultural and the mechanics. Some land grant colleges still carry that in their title. Texas A&M.
Mm-hmm.
There was an Oklahoma A&M.
Mm-hmm.
There was a Kansas A&M. Missouri was the University of Missouri. So how did they get that done? They granted to the colleges through their elected representatives. Every congressional representative, along with the 2 senators from each state, had 30,000 acres each that they could go out and attach. Now that's kind of a new legal term. They could go out and attach it if there wasn't anybody homesteading it, or if it did not belong to somebody else. They could attach it for the benefit later by the curators of the University of Missouri to fund and become a land grant institution. Mm-hmm. This was true all the way across all institutions. Mm-hmm. There's an interesting story in the background. Cornell, New York, they were pretty well populated up. They took their rights and went to Minnesota, and they acquired or attached it to some of the great standing forests out there, and they still own it today.
Still own the forest?
Yes.
Wow.
So here in Webster County, the last one that I found in the abstracts was a little piece of land down about where the interstate, the new interstate connection is, and I think the Brooks family bought it in 1930s or 40s.
Is that right?
And
well, there's some conservation land out there too.
Yes.
Some state conservation land in that area.
But the title, the conveyance of the title was the curators of the University of Missouri.
I'll be darned.
I found that in my audit.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it.
One of your 1,000 audits.
Yeah.
That's just unbelievable. Logan, we're going to stay just a little longer. We've still got some more stuff to cover, and Larry's so interesting and so much appreciate him coming in. So that was the college land grant, and that happened the same year as the education one, so 1862, according to your research. And then the next one was the soldier recruitment.
This one completely threw me.
Yeah.
I was going through the abstracts, and I find that there was a Webster County tract of land, more than one. There was a dozen maybe or so that I stumbled onto, and it was like this. There was an assignee. The right was assigned to a third party but the recipient of the assigned land was a member of some military group in New Hampshire or New Jersey, and
Yeah.
this made no sense to me. And how does this work? And then I listened to a lot of audio books, and I finally hit the answer. I got the answer there. Not sure which war it was, but I think it was 1812.
Mm-hmm.
There was a huge difficulty in getting soldiers to subscribe to the military. So they enhanced that with cash bonuses and 40 acres of land. So soldiers took that.
Mm-hmm.
X number of years later, a brainstorm, I'm sure, came up in somebody's mind. Hey, wait a minute. That was to get him into the military, but he has never exercised the right to go attach land. I need to buy several of these.
There were probably a lot of them were clustered
And they
together.
were, because they had all served in some unit over here in New Jersey.
Sure.
So they began to search that out through newspaper advertisements or whatever. And they brought the assignment to Webster County and attached land here. Entirely had the right to do it.
Yeah.
The soldier had a right to do it. They bought the right, accumulated, and then they could put land together in a larger unit.
Yeah.
So it was intriguing to me.
So that was pretty, that one went back further. That was earlier.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, it couldn't have been the Civil War.
Right.
So it had to be before that. So it had to be the Mexican War or probably the War of 1812.
Which was only a half a dozen years from the Louisiana Purchase.
Yes, right. And so they jumped back and they gave those attachments out to some of the people. Their problem was with their Marine. They had Madison had messed around for so long, and Congress wouldn't approve anything to up their Marine, and they all at once needed that to fight the war, and so they had to encourage that. Wow. They did, and then somebody assembled that, and here they came, and okay,
that's interesting.
It's legal.
It's so interesting, but of course, this 40 acres stuck somewhere out in Missouri in this unpopulated territory that just been purchased a few years by us from France, and it's like a lot of them probably never even, I don't know, never saw the light of day. But
But so that was an abstract thing, but I found it very interesting.
So and then the last one you had down here was the railroad land. A lot of us
pretty complicated.
I bet it's complicated, but we've all bought property, and it was the first railroad edition of Marshfield or whatever. If you go back and look at the abstract, it was originally owned by, I guess it was Atlantic Pacific initially, wasn't it?
Yeah, it changed names several times.
Yeah.
What do you have time to listen to this real quick?
We sure do. We can stay till about 2:30. Then I got to make my way to the square for that. We're good.
The basic breakdown on the railroad land was very simple. The United States government said to Missouri, we believe that you need to have a railroad running from St. Louis to the southwest to the border of Missouri. Now, they had Union Pacific and some of them that were doing the north part, running railroads across. So we would give you 1 million acres. Missouri took the 1 million acres. Not legally described.
Was this the federal government that said we needed to do this?
Federal? Well, I think the state was petitioning. It was sort of a joint, we need to have a road running toward Mexico
Yeah.
or the Southwest.
Right.
And since we're already developed in St. Louis, we probably should start it there and run it southwest. Did not have an end point.
Mm-hmm.
It just said to the western boundary of Missouri.
But now Fort Smith was kind of a major not metropolitan, urban area, now populated area.
Yeah,
I guess.
yeah. Fort Smith was pretty much
Yeah.
on the trails and
Yeah,
the traces
yeah.
and all that
Stagecoaches
kind of
and-
stuff. So they started, and there was a corporation that was formed, let's say, and yeah, we'll do it. We'll build the railroad. Now, how are we going to finance it? We've got to get this game on. So with Missouri, with the United States giving them, let's say, 1 million acres, Missouri could generate railroad bonds with the land and the track that ran across the land. So they began to put together a financing package with railroad bonds. And they could peddle that out to the eastern states because that's where the money was at. Frontier Missouri had no money. And so they peddled those out to the east. And then they started building, of course, the railroad. Now, here's how the railroad land. They couldn't just take all down the railroad track. Here was the kicker. When you run railroad track through an even numbered section of land, from
Right.
here to, then you are entitled to 6 miles to the north. That'd be 6 sections, and 6 sections to the south.
Mm-hmm.
That's railroad land. It expires at the end of the 6 sections, both directions, but that's railroad land. Now, the land next to it, that's going to be federal land available for homestead.
Homestead.
So that's how the checkerboard pattern went all the way across the state of Missouri.
So they owned 12 miles, 6 and 6.
That's right.
Wow. That's why. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And-
why
and-
all this whole town is railroad land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then one corporation would go defunct, and they would
Yeah.
the state of Missouri would come back in with the receivership. They
Yeah.
would receive all of it, and then they was going to have to put more money into it and get another corporation. So there was many name changes and many corporate.
So your and my farm would have been railroad land.
Could have been,
I mean-
unless it was located over
Well,
or
that's
under
true.
the
Yeah,
odds.
that's true.
the odds
On the
section.
odds section.
I
That-
think our
good chance it
land
could have
is.
touched it. Mine are probably more,
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then later on, to wrap this thing up a little bit, later on, the railroads, after they were successful, they wanted to haul freight. They had a lot of excess real estate. They wanted to sell that. And so there was another corporation that came into existence, Ozark Plateau Land Development. If you go look at any of the old plat maps,
Mm-hmm. I've seen it.
big,
Yeah.
or huge.
Yeah.
They became the real estate arm then for the railroads.
The railroad.
And they were interested in moving, just like any real estate dealer would be, moving large chunks. And that's when you begin to have apple orchards, peach orchards, large
Mm-hmm.
Hubble Ranch,
Mm-hmm.
Roper Ranch.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's and
Yeah.
so they wanted to sell
Sections.
large tracts of land, and did. They were pretty successful. But I think now, like I said earlier,
Yeah.
if I don't know for sure, well, I'll just tell you. I'll tell the group something. I think the railroad bonds were retired in about 1934 33, early in 33.
Huh.
By that time, the real estate, every time they sold a tract of land, they had to redeem railroad bonds with it. It wasn't that they just could go do whatever they wanted to. They had to reduce the railroad bonds.
Yeah.
And I think they fully retired it around. But some of those corporations were headed by Civil War generals, got in on
Oh,
this
yeah.
in pretty good shape.
I'm sure they did.
Yeah.
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 Huh.
The railroad was a big deal, but it was so very important.
Oh my goodness.
And to follow up on it just a little bit, the thing that led to the banking deal, and we might examine that sometime later whenever you don't have other good programs that would be interesting.
Oh, this is great.
Tie buying stations became commerce centers. Niangua, Conway, Marshfield.
Was that for that back then though, or that was during for the wars? But I guess back then too.
Back then because
Grandpa Cale ran
because the telegraph lines followed the railroad.
Yes.
Civil War, the railroad had been started and was the trailhead was in Rolla.
Okay.
Then after the Civil War, because there was a tremendous amount of Civil War activity in Washington, Missouri. They're just south of the capital. A lot of the Confederates would come along and burn the railroad bridges and tear up the tracks. The Union would put it back together, but whenever the Confederates took over, then they would burn the tracks.
Yeah.
So, but Rollo was the
hub.
I mean, whenever the Wilson's Creek people, the Union got beat at Wilson's Creek.
Yeah.
And the armies advanced to Rollo, the train. That was where the sources. So we probably better conclude.
Yeah, I want to talk because you've got done a lot of history on banking in Webster County, and that's interesting. Obviously, my dad was a banker, and I'd love to hear that. Yeah. But I guess we will have to do it another day. We knew this would happen. We all,
we had so much information on our plate.
But let's do that. Let's just plan on it. In a few weeks. I've got another guy coming next week already, but we'll see what's on the schedule.
You keep doing this with anybody,
it all doesn't matter. We just want to make sure that people learn as much as they can about the history of Marshfield, Webster County, and our state, and even our country. It's important to pass that on. We lose a little of that every year, every generation.
The post office system depended on the railroad, and so in all these little burgs that we mentioned, there was a post office probably in the general merchandise store.
Sure there was.
And then of course you had to have your bars and your saloons, and then you had to have on the other corners churches.
Yep.
You had communities made.
Absolutely.
Out of those tie-buying stations.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about the ties. That's exactly right. Potosi, Missouri was where the headquarters of the company that your Uncle Cale, my granddad, worked for. He was the regional manager here during World War II, and actually did not get drafted because of that, because he had a very important job buying ties for the railroads.
Right, yeah.
And it's an interesting story, and of course, my mother and Don Rost and her brothers and sisters all ended up living in Calico Rock, Arkansas for a while because of his job with the tie company. But railroads control so much of the lives of people in those days.
They were very important. Very important.
Absolutely. Larry, this has been phenomenal, and I want to have you back soon, and we'll talk more about the history of Webster County and some of your research. And thank you for doing the research, number one. That's a lot of work.
It was
1,000 abstracts. It really is.
It's intriguing,
It is.
and you learn so much.
Yeah, yeah.
And it does make you. I don't know how to describe it really, Lyndall, but you become much more intimate with the history.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's so important.
It's connection. It's connecting us all together.
Yeah.
You know, we're all put on this earth and taken off from the earth in basically the same way. I mean, you know, we're all in this thing together. And the more we can connect, I think the more we can make the world even better, because we can learn from each other, our faults and our, you know, our victories and our defeats. And if we can share that and the ones of those that have went before us, I mean, look how much better lives we have because our parents didn't have opportunities we had, and their parents didn't have opportunities they had.
Right.
And it makes our world a lot better, but doesn't mean there's a lot of things we still don't need to work on. And there's some things that we don't do as well as we used to do. And we need to remind ourselves
Right.
and teach our future generations of some of the things that were better in the days ahead of before us, you know.
Well, it's been a privilege for
Yeah.
me to share with you, and I hope that somebody in the listening audience, and you know, we don't, if there's a group out there somewhere that would like to put a few people together,
Yes.
and here. As long as I don't drive anymore, my wife does all the driving. But I stand ready to share.
That would be
with
great.
anybody.
And we could do that right here in this building. We have several meeting rooms, and I would love to host that. And we could be a 2-hour thing or whatever people would want to do. But I know you've got a lot of information that, you know, we didn't have time to touch upon, and we could go in more depth. I'd be honored to host that and have you come and do that. So
Well, Webster County is special, and
Yes.
whenever you stop and think about it, I don't know of any other county along like we are.
Mhm.
We're just one county removed from Green,
Mm-hmm.
but we have 2 railroad tracks that go through our county.
Yeah, we do. That's right. And 2 major interstates that parallel each
Absolutely.
other. And
We're lucky.
we are lucky. And we've said that forever. I mean, we're an hour to Table Rock. We're an hour to Lake of the Ozarks. We're an hour to Fort Wood if you need, you know, if you're a military person. And then we have all the amenities that Springfield has to offer. We're very fortunate. Beautiful terrain, beautiful country. We still have our identity as a community here in Marshfield too. So far we still have that identity.
Right.
We all want to see progress and we all want to see some growth, but not too much too fast.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank
We
you
appreciate
for
you.
the opportunity.
Absolutely. We'll see y'all next week. Oh, by the way, I put together a list of all of the guests we've had, and I put it on my Facebook this morning under the Marshfield Old School Times header. So if you Google that or click that on Facebook, you'll be able to see all the various guests and the dates they were on, and you can go back and pick up some of those shows that you might have missed. We've just really been blessed with some interesting folks and sharing their stories. So be sure and do that. Thank you all. We'll see you next week.